Kenneth Allen McDuff was sentenced to death for the murder of 3 people in 1966. After being paroled in 1989, he went on to murder at least 5 more women before being caught and sentenced to death for a second time. In the early 1960s, Kenneth Allen McDuff began his criminal activities with burglaries and robberies. In 1964, when he was 18, he was sentenced to serve 12 years in prison concurrently, although he was released after 1 year in 1965. In 1966, McDuff and his accomplice Roy Dale Green kidnapped 3 teenagers: Edna Louise Sullivan, 15, Robert Brand, 17, and Mark Dunham, 15, in Everman, Texas. They were taken to a remote location where McDuff threatened the trio with his .38 caliber Colt revolver and ordered them to get into the trunk of their car. With Green following McDuff, McDuff drove the victims forward onto a highway and into a field, where he ordered Sullivan to get out of the trunk of the Ford and Green to put her in the trunk of his Dodge Coronet. At this point, according to Green's statement, McDuff said he was going to have to drop them. He proceeded to fire 6 bullets into the trunk of the Ford despite pleas from Dunham and Brand not to. McDuff then ordered Green to wipe the Ford clean of fingerprints. After driving to another location, McDuff and Green, who was allegedly under duress, raped Sullivan. After being repeatedly raped, McDuff asked Green for something to strangle her with. Green gave him his belt. However, McDuff ultimately opted to use a 3-foot-long broom from his car. He strangled Sullivan, and Green then dumped her body in some bushes. In the days that followed, Green confessed his guilt to friends and family, who convinced him to turn himself in. McDuff was also arrested shortly after. Green was sentenced to 25 years in prison for his testimony against McDuff. McDuff was convicted and sentenced to death, but his sentence was commuted to life in prison after the Supreme Court's 1972 decision in Furman v. Georgia, which temporarily halted the death penalty in the United States. McDuff was released on parole in 1989 due to prison overcrowding and the parole board's belief that he could still contribute to society, despite protests from law enforcement officials. McDuff made no attempt to show that he had reformed. He was convicted of threatening, attempting to start a fight with others, and even of public intoxication and driving under the influence. He began drinking heavily and became addicted to cocaine. During a roadblock in October 1991, a woman was seen trying to kick out the windshield of a car with her hand behind her back and was never seen alive again. She was later identified as a prostitute named Brenda Thompson. Just a few days later, another prostitute, Regina Gina Moore, disappeared. In December 1991, McDuff and his best friend, Alva Hank Worley, were driving their car looking for drugs. Worley later testified that McDuff would point out specific women along the street that he wanted to flirt with. That night, they saw Colleen Reed, an accountant, washing her car at a car wash. McDuff grabbed her and forced her into the car. The 2 men raped the woman, and although witnesses called the police, they were too late. McDuff drove Worley to the store and later disposed of the body. While working at Quick Pack Market, McDuff developed a crush on his first manager's wife, Melissa Northrup. On several occasions, he stated that he wanted to rob the store and take Melissa. Her husband became concerned when she did not return home one night after her shift, and an investigation was launched. Witnesses were able to identify McDuff at the scene of the kidnapping, as well as at the site where Colleen Reed was kidnapped. A month later, Melissa Northrup's body was found. Around the same time, another body was found in the woods. Her name was Valencia K. Joshua, a prostitute who was last seen searching McDuff's bedroom. At this point, McDuff had fled Texas, acquired a new car and fake identification. He became a garbage collector. Shortly after Melissa Northrup's body was found, he was profiled on America's Most Wanted. Just a day later, a co-worker called the police to tell them where he had been found. He was stopped during a garbage stop and became the 208th man to be successfully arrested on America's Most Wanted. On February 18, 1993, Kenneth Allen McDuff was sentenced to death for a second time. He was executed by lethal injection on